Greetings, bike travelers and bike packers. Welcome to another episode of Chainwheel Diaries, stories about bike travel told by the travelers themselves. I'm your host, Brian Berlin. My guest today is Karen Kent, a seasoned bike adventurer from Swall Meadows, California. She will absolutely sell you on biking South Korea and Japan and give major props to the outfitter she traveled with called TDA Global. You'll want to learn more about these tours. She's also ridden the length of the Pacific Coast in California and cycled around the Pacific Northwest. Her stories are informative, educational, and inspiring. Stick around to the conclusion of the podcast to hear me read a short excerpt from her upcoming book, Bike Mind. I think you'll be able to relate. As a reminder, Chainwheel Diaries is available on Spotify and Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for tuning in wherever you are, and please be sure to like and subscribe. Now let's meet Karen Kent. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Brian.
Tell us about yourself and where you're located.
I'm from California, like you are. I split my time between Encinitas, which is in San Diego County, so ocean based. And right now I'm up in the Eastern Sierra in a little area called Swall Meadows that's right between Mammoth and Bishop. And at the moment, we're awaiting the return of winter, which has been absent for the last month and a half. So it's quite exciting to have a storm on the horizon. And I took a 30-mile ride this morning just because I know I won't be on my bike for the next few days.
So you said you're not working. That gives you plenty of time to bike, I guess. What did you do before you weren't working?
Yeah, I worked in the outdoor industry. I worked, in the beginning of my career, I worked for a company called 510, which makes bike shoes. Really great mountain bike, gravel biking shoes. But I was drawn into the company because of rock climbing. I have been a rock climber since my early 20s, and I still am, but I am 62 now, and my body doesn't like climbing as much as it used to. Whereas biking is just incredibly accommodating.
Tell us how you got started in bike travel.
I haven't been like a lifetime biker. I was a climber, but in my late 40s, I was a soccer mom, and my daughter got her driver's license, and it was magic because right about that same time, one of my colleagues at work was walking around the office trying to sell his wife's bike. And I don't know, I hadn't had a bike since I was, I don't know, in my teens. And that was just this itch that suddenly I had to have. And another woman was interested in the bike, and I like listened to her negotiating about it. And then she went for a test ride. And I was so happy when she decided she wasn't going to buy the bike, because then I said, okay, I know his wife Kelly was about my size. And since I didn't really know much about biking other than that, I was like, okay, I'm going to put down my $350 and get this bike. That just opened this door for me of just having my own space, my own little thing. I was still going to the soccer meets and the running matches and working. I traveled a lot for my work. And the biking was just something I could do for half an hour, 45 minutes. And slowly over the years, I started stretching out the rides. And then one year I went up to visit some friends of mine in Sonoma, and my friend's husband and two of their sons were doing a century ride. It was an MS fundraiser from San Francisco up to Sonoma. And I don't know, that just like it just struck something in me. And I said, next year I'm going to do that. And so I had to stretch my rides from like 10-mile rides to 60-mile rides over the coming year. And sure enough, I showed up and I did that ride. And I just fell in love with the sport while I was cutting my teeth. And I had few little tumbles and, mishaps that newbie cyclists have. But even those didn't really chuff me. 2018, I had my first really serious bike accident. And this is important because I recovered from it. When I had this accident, I don't remember what happened. I had a pretty profound concussion. I fractured my occipital condyle, which is the back of my head, tore some ligaments in my neck. My face got all road rashed. I separated my shoulder, and I, to this day, don't remember what happened. I've ridden by that site. I've driven by it. I've walked it. I don't know what happened. I laid in bed for a month, and that was really hard. But I got out of bed and I got back on my bike after 6 weeks. And I was still having like these fragmented memories. And I really had a hard time coming back to work and sort of grasping, all this, the fast pace of work. But biking sort of became this sort of part of my recovery. I bought a new bike. That was symbolic. It was important to me. And when I picked out the bike, I bought a steel touring bike. And I couldn't yet put sort of the pin on the fact that I had this desire to go touring. I just thought it was cool that this bike would enable me to go farther. 2 years later, I retired. And a month and a half after I retired, I had my husband drop me on the Oregon, California border, and I rode home to San Diego, actually to the Mexican border. And it was sort of a whim. I had never gone anywhere overnight. I didn't know anybody who was into bike touring. I did take the liberty of traveling with a credit card, so no, I didn't pack a tent and sleeping bag or any sort of cooking equipment. I felt like I'd sort of earned that in my retirement. I didn't do a lot of research on it. I was working right up until I retired pretty heavily, and I just sort of figured it would all work out. Basically, that trip opened the door for future trips.
You've ridden the coast of California, you've ridden in Japan, Korea, Pacific Northwest. So if you were me meeting someone for the first time, which adventure would you start with to tell somebody about?
Well, each trip was different, and I think we all have personalities that maybe are drawn to different types of trips. I was a really gregarious people person. I worked in the sales industry. I would travel up to places like REI and Nordstrom and Eastern Mountain Sports, and went to a lot of trade shows, and you'd think that I'd be drawn to some sort of big group rides, but I actually think it was important that I cut my teeth doing this alone. The way I started going down the California coast was sort of perfect for me because I made mistakes, I got lost and I had nobody to turn to say, oh, I wish you'd told me differently, or this group organized this wrong, or there was nobody to account for my discomfort other than my own. That was really important to me. I mean, I made the most out of that trip. I did make it social. I stopped and visited friends all along the way, but I also really enjoyed the learning experience of riding alone.
You said you got lost. I think that getting lost on a bike tour or a bike adventure is what makes it an adventure. You have to rely on yourself to get yourself out of a jam. You're out there on the road on your bike. You can't go back. You can only go forward. How did you deal with that?
This wasn't really getting lost, but one of my, like, the first day I was riding, I rode out of, from the border, the California, welcome to California sign. And I planned like an easy day. It was going to be a 45-mile day. And I was going to stay at a hotel that was adjacent to like this tribal casino. And it was the only, up there, there isn't a lot of lodging options. It was the only hotel within this like distance that I thought would be a comfortable start for me. I'm riding along and I get to the hotel at, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the hotel was closed and it had a sign taped to the window saying no agua, no portable water. We are closed. And then the casino had the exact same sign taped, handwritten sign taped to the window. And there's also not a lot of cell phone connectivity up there. And I had to walk, I walked, clocked or a clock, in my bike shoes around the parking lot looking for, even just like one cell. I finally found, this one place I could connect and try and find a hotel that was further down the road. And I ended up getting back on my bike and riding an additional 35 miles. So it ended up being a big day. And the craziest thing is I wasn't upset about that. I was sort of disappointed that I was done so early. And the fact that I could get back on my bike and continue to ride along this beautiful coast and even go through my first taste of the Northern California redwoods was just magnificent. So, that could have, for many people, I think it would have been just devastating.
Not many people will ride in other countries like Japan and Korea, but you did a tour there. Is that right?
Yeah, in fact, I've heard some of the people you've interviewed have mentioned that they've either been to Japan or they're hoping to go to Korea or Japan. I have to say, anybody who's listening to this, if you have an itch to go there, it's a marvelous adventure. For this trip, I worked with a group. So I worked with TDA, which stands for Tour de Afrique. It's a group out of Canada,
I'm
and
familiar.
they were great. They're not a luxe trip. So you're allowed to bring a very small duffel bag. You have to bring your own bike repair spokes, extra tires, tubes, everything, patch kits. You're not going there for luxe. This is no backroads trip. Backroads seems great for a lot of people, but I was looking to be at sort of the edge of support. And they also are known for setting up like really good, like I like to climb, I like hard rides, and they sort of brag about this adventure factor to the rides they organize. Yeah, this ride covered the entire Korean peninsula. So we started in Seoul, which is a city of like 9.6 million people, huge city, and rode down to Busan, which is one of the biggest ports in the world. And then we flew. Anybody organizing this trip, I would say take the ferry. Flying was stupid. But apparently during COVID for a while, they didn't have a ferry, so they just hadn't sort of worked it back in the schedule. So the Korean Peninsula flew to Nagasaki and rode our bikes from Nagasaki up to Sapporo. So almost the entire length of Japan. It didn't include some of the southern islands like Okinawa, but really sort of covered most of Japan. That was 27 days of riding. But then there were, days off, like 2 days in Tokyo, one day in Kyoto, a few days in Seoul and Busan, and there were breaks. But 27 days of riding was pretty rigorous. Like we were averaging about 60 miles a day. We were averaging, I don't know, we did just under 100,000 feet of climbing during the course of the trip. So anybody preparing a trip to go there, get your legs in shape and make sure your gearing is right for your bike. That's really pays off. Not everybody takes the time to fine tune their bike prior to a trip, but if you're going to go, it would be a shame to get someplace like that and just really struggle on climbs.
Expand on that a little bit about the gearing. I think everybody's interested in that. I certainly am.
Let's see, I was the bike I had on that trip was Shimano, so I had a 1044, so just I had a nice big chain ring to go up to. I was basically overgeared. So it was pretty rare that I would have to drop into that, but I think it's really riding day after day it's cumulative. It really gets tiring, and all that climbing really can wear people out. And so the goal of having this great gearing was that I didn't have to put in like my maximum effort every time I would do a climb. You could just sort of go into cruise mode and get yourself three-quarters of the way up. And then if you felt like felt psyched in your legs, you could go for it and then it would feel natural and you wouldn't wear yourself out. I have a great bike mechanic I work with. I went to him, I described to him what I was looking for. I'd done my own research online, but it really helped to have somebody to go back and forth with. He ended up, advising me to set up my bike the way he would his gravel bike.
How do you like the interview so far? If you like it, please support my effort to keep publishing this podcast. The best support you can provide is to subscribe. That way you'll be notified when a new episode drops. Tell your friends, leave comments, share the link. These are all good ways to help me promote Chainwheel Diaries. Also, if you're a bike traveler, bike packer, or bike adventurer, and you have stories to share, drop me a line, Brian Berlin at chainwheeldiaries.com. Link below. And thank you very much for listening. Now back to the show. For this particular tour, it sounds like it was fully supported. You weren't carrying a bunch of gear. They were carrying that for you and you were
Yeah,
hoteling along the way.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a really small duffel bag. So I mean, let's see, three. I did have the luxury of like three chamois. That was great. I didn't have to wash them in the sink every night the way I had, when I was doing my previous two trips down the coast of California and then Pacific Northwest. Like I probably had of a bag that weighed maybe 30 pounds, five of it was bike equipment, bike, repair supplies and everything like that. But yeah, we would have to put our bags in the back of a van at 6:30 in the morning and wheels up pretty much right after that. They would set up a lunch for us that was based on whatever they could find at the local markets. And then dinners were, of course, the big treat, or both in both countries, actually, the parking lot beers were the biggest treat, followed by dinner. The food in Korea and Japan is quite different. I'd say it was difficult to get enough calories for breakfast if you don't like eating dinner for breakfast. So in Korea in particular, like I know that the TDA people would ask for hard-boiled eggs, for instance. And several of the restaurants didn't understand what that was. So you pick your egg out of the basket in the morning and you're all excited to have just, an egg or two, and they'd be raw eggs. That was disappointing. In Japan, I actually learned to like sushi for breakfast, but still coming home to a big bowl of muesli and yogurt was a luxury. Definitely. Yeah, I wasn't the only one who struggled with the breakfast calories. I mean, you just have to go with an open mind and you have to be willing to try anything you're served.
Would you recommend this group, TDA, for someone who's interested in doing something like this?
I would recommend that people look at their website, and I think it's pretty obviously apparent that the trips are going to be physically challenging. They do annually a tour from Cairo to Cape Town. So they do their original Tour de Afrique. Last year, they did a trip from northern Canada all the way down to Panama. This year, they're doing a trip from Colombia down to Ushuaia. They do a trip that's the Silk Roads. All the trips are sort of big bites, big meaty bites. And if that's appealing to people, I wouldn't expect any sort of sag wagons to pick you up and, take you off to your, hotel if you're just not into it during the day. It doesn't mean they're not there in case of emergencies. I mean, certainly I think they seem like pros. If something needed to be triaged, I feel like they'd be there. It's fun traveling with a group like that. Everybody, I'm 62 and I was average, like of a lot of people who are like 58 to 673. And how incredibly motivating is it to be around a lot of serious cyclists who have traveled the world cycling, and you get to hear the war stories and you get to learn a lot about bike tech and I don't know, everything. It was fabulous. I really enjoyed it very much.
When you travel with a group, there is a lot of discussion about bike tech. Everybody wants to know what everybody else is using. How big of a group was it?
There were 15 of us who did the entire trip, and there was an option to do some segments. I'd say the most popular one was Nagasaki to Tokyo. Yeah, the whole trip, 15, you really get to know each other. And people from Denmark and France and New Zealand, Australia had a good contingent. Canada had a good, strong contingent. But getting back just quickly, for those people who are interested in going, can I just like spray about Korea for a moment? Korea has incredible world-class bike infrastructure. And they have invested heavily in creating a space that's just ideal for people who want to travel on their bikes. You leave the city of Seoul, 9.6 million people. You think it would be hair raising. And no, it was so easy. These bike paths were incredibly well marked. There were a lot of cyclists on them, but it never felt overcrowded or dangerous. The flow was really well managed. They had toilets like every 5 miles or so, and they were clean and they had flush, you could flush them. Some of them had music in them. They had dedicated bike tunnels. Some of them had music playing throughout the bike tunnel. Sometimes just to keep the bike path off the roadways, it would be sort of elevated over the side of lakes or the water. They turned a lot of dikes. I mean, that country gets, you can tell, a lot of heavy rain, and they have to move a lot of water through especially the farmland as it comes out of the mountains. What better place to put a bike path than on top of a dike? And so you have these beautiful views. You can be following the well signed bike path, and suddenly it'll look like you're just dropping into a farm. But there's a little, the bike path continues and it cuts through rice paddies. You see people working the land, and it's beautiful, and you feel safe the entire way.
A combination of roads and bike paths?
Yeah, sometimes you're on the side of roads, but even then it's well marked. Cars were incredibly considerate. Yeah, nobody in our group felt in any way uncomfortable with the vehicles.
We're in the United States woefully inadequate on bike infrastructure. So I'm sure that's one of the things that really jumped out at you.
Well, here's the thing so this is my summary of Korea. If you build it, they'll come. There were so many cyclists and everybody waves, you get the head bows. People were acknowledged each other. It was a little bit odd. A lot of the Koreans wear full bandit style face masks. I wasn't sure. Like I'd read in Japan that happened because there's a lot of allergies, and it was certainly high pollen season. But we went over to Japan, same pollen, and they actually didn't have many face masks. So I actually didn't understand that. I never got a good explanation for it. But regardless, it still didn't feel like a barrier towards, sort of the head bows and the acknowledgments of, the people you're passing. And the landscape is beautiful. There's a number of UNESCO heritage sites you can pass through. There's temples, shrines, all sorts of enchanting, exotic, foreign feeling. There was one area called the Busan Alps coming into Busan that we had just one day where we climbed over 5,000 feet in the day.
Well, let's compare and contrast to your epic adventures down the California coast. I'd be interested in that route. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what were some of the adventures along the way?
Okay, well, I took the Highway 1 and 101 as goes almost the entire length of the state. You start out on the 101 up at the border. You shouldn't get lost it sounds like it should be so easy. I think the getting lost part was me. You can ask my family, ask my lovely husband who indulges me on these bike trips. He doesn't cycle himself. Ask my kids, ask anybody who knows me. I have a terrible sense of direction. Somebody could tell me, go straight ahead down the 101, and somehow I would take a left turn and, and be climbing, and I'd be like, I think I should be seeing the ocean. So for most people, this should be an incredibly easy route. You shouldn't have to burden yourself with like loading a lot of maps onto your phone, although, Ride GPS is a great place to do that. You can get your maps off of Strava. There's plenty of sources for that. You can use an old paper map You can just use Google Maps. It's such a direct route. The only time sometimes, like for instance, I had to get a minor bike repair when went through Arcata. This is very Northern California. And I was really thankful that the guy at Revolution Bikes told me about a bike path that cut through Eureka. And Eureka is sort of a hairy city. It's got like maybe not very trustworthy drivers. And I was so grateful, even though there was quite a lot of unhoused people living along this bike path, it was still vastly preferable to being trying to get through that little city. And there's I think it's you could probably answer this for me. I can't remember the name of it. Like it's the California bike route or something like that. There's like something called the California bike route.
The Pacific Coast Route.
Yeah, Pacific Coast Route.
It's been
And
mapped by the Adventure Cycling Association.
okay, well, I didn't do any research, so I didn't know this, but these
No
signs will
problem.
appear periodically along the road. They're so infrequent. They're not there to give you directions. They don't give you any comfort that you could follow signs like in Korea or Japan, depending Japan less to less extent, but in Korea, you'd have a sign. Like you could literally navigate just by the bike signs. You're sort of heading south. I mean, if the sun is setting, you sort of know where the sun is supposed to be. So I did find like that bike path was important. And then there is a point where you have to cut from Garberville over to Fort Bragg. And that's actually where Highway 1 starts. It's just this all of a sudden Highway 1, and it seems so random, just sort of wishbones off of the 101. It was the one part of my bike trip that I'd prepared. I knew it was going to be a big climb. I can't remember. It was like 1,800 feet or something. And
I've
at
heard.
that point, I'd never done like a contiguous 1,800-foot climb. I was terrified of this thing. And I actually trained, like that was my goal. I had this one hill here in the Sierras that was 1,800 feet. And I did it because I was so mortified that I'd have to walk my bike up this hill. And when I finally got to it, it was great. I was overpsyked and I flew up the thing and it was no problem. I still had even though I was staying in hotels, I still had a lot of stuff because I had a pack, a seat pack, a big long, rooster tail sticking out of the back of my bike and frame pack and a handlebar bag, a big, dump. It was like my kitchen sink for all my crap. And I definitely brought more stuff than I needed, but it was my first trip and I wanted a cute outfit or two for when I was with my friends. I had plenty of stuff. I didn't want to walk my bike. That was my goal.
I'd like to know more about that. What bike you're riding and how you set it up.
Yeah, so I was on this Niner, an RLT steel bike. Really happy I had that bike. It's like a road warrior. I call it, my name for it is Sherpa. When you have a steel frame, first of all, you just don't have to, if I did crash or something, I wouldn't have to worry about my frame breaking. It's such a great, reliable bike. And it weighs like 10 pounds more than my carbon fiber bike. But it doesn't matter. You're not, I mean, yes, I'd have to carry this thing up the steps to some of my hotel rooms and things like that, but I love that stable frame, especially going downhill. I felt so safe and stable on downhills, especially when you have weight. And I'm from San Diego. I have no reason to ever go riding in the rain. I didn't even own a rain jacket before this trip. And so, being on a stable bike, I had plenty of rain. I had thick, dense, weepy fog. And so, just being on a bike that you can trust, having little wider tires on the bike, it really made a difference to have a bike that was set up well.
Did you have it set up with flat bars or drop bars?
No, it has drop bars. I like the drop bars. It's actually a gravel bike, so they're slightly flared, and I ride both the top and bottom. I change a lot. I think it's really great for your back to change your position quite frequently. All of this stuff I've sort of learned slowly. I took that bike over with me to Korea and Japan. It's a great bike also for building and unbuilding, and you're throwing it in a box. You don't know what's going to happen. You sort of. I have an air tag for it, but you just sort of hope that it doesn't get lost or the box doesn't get crushed. But if it was going to, I'd much rather have it be a steel bike than a carbon bike. But my new bike, I just got a Moots titanium bike. That bike is too expensive for me. So I was really excited to find it on the Pros Closet, place you can go to buy used bikes, frames, components. And I found my dream bike at a price that was sort of my almost my dream price. So my next trip, I'm going to be riding. I leave on May 3rd with the TDA group again, and we're doing a book trip called the Odyssey, and we're riding from Athens to Amsterdam.
Wow.
And yeah, I just wanted a bike that was I wanted a bike that would be a little lighter. These long trips are hard on your body. And if I could just, every time I'm picking it up and everything, if I can save myself 5 pounds, it's worth it.
For these trips, how do you pack? Not the TDA, but for your California coast and your
Mhm.
Pacific Northwest, how do you pack? What do you carry?
Yeah, so I do carry two chamois and I try to wash. It's so funny. Most of the guys that no, most of the people I ride with are when I ride with others are guys. And so it was sort of funny to get that early information about how to pack and to have your guy friends try and explain to you that you needed to wash your chamois every day. It was a delightfully awkward conversation. But yeah, I took that seriously, and so I do bring two pairs of bike shorts, and just wash the moment I get to the hotel room. I'll wash one pair of the whatever I've been wearing that day, and for the most part, they dry the next day. But anybody who's ridden in the rain before, it doesn't really matter. It's just nice to have a clean pair of bike shorts to put on, and then I'll bring two jerseys and my gosh, you have to have a good rain jacket. My trip to Japan and Korea, I had a Gore-Tex jacket it was brand new and expensive, and it leaked on the first day. And I'd never used it in the rain. It was great for the wind in the winter of the Eastern Sierra, but again, we don't get a lot of rain here in California, so I mean, you have to go stand in your shower if you're in California and you want to test a rain jacket. And my new jacket, which the company, after I nagged quite a bit, replaced, they sent me this new one and I stood in the shower and it works. So, but yeah, you need a rain jacket. Layers are just super important. Little wind vest. I have yeah, multiple layers. I think your clothing for biking is the number one thing you focus on. And my trip with my daughter through Washington and Oregon, we did not bring cute clothes or or any extras, a pair of shorts and a sweatshirt.
The trick with riding in the rain, I rode in the rain last summer with a friend of mine. We rode the Katy Trail in Missouri.
Mhm.
It rained on us the first 2 days. I had a poncho. It was a cheap poncho that I bought at a football game. It worked really well because I could get air underneath, but yet I was dry on top. But I've read that your trade-off is being waterproof versus breathable. And apparently you can't really have both. Do you find that to be the case?
I might ask me after this next trip. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind being wet. It's that if you have the risk of being cold, I've been so cold and wet that like shaking cold. Yeah, like I got for Christmas, I asked for, I'm all excited to have like a little rain beanie to wear underneath my helmet, and it has a bill on it. So I wear glasses. I mean, of course, I wear cycling glasses, but they need to be prescriptions. So when my glasses, are really wet, I can't see.
Yeah, I have to wear
You wear
prescription
glasses, so
glasses.
you
Yeah.
understand. But I also, yeah, I find that if even if the jacket isn't working, if you can lock down like the amount of water coming in when it's cold out, so I would just pull the jacket hood over my helmet, and I was always warmer, just as wet, but warmer is absolutely key. And then I do think it's worth if you have any risk of riding in the cold. I don't know if how many people have tried the waterproof like overshoes. They're sort of like rubbers. They just seem like a pain in the butt to have to pull on. I feel like just using your little neoprene booties, even if it's a half booty, it'll keep your feet warm. That's my main thing is I've learned like stay warm, forget the wet.
What about tech?
Well, let's see. I haven't ridden, I ride tubeless here at home, and I've been riding with tubes on the road. The craziest thing is I've done, let's see, I don't know, 5,000, say 5,000 miles of travel, bike adventuring, and I've never had a flat. I can change flats, no problem. When my daughter and I rode through Washington and Oregon, I offered to buy her new tires before the bike trip, but I didn't get to see her until like right before we started, and she showed up with her old tires, and we had five flats in 12 days of riding. So I have no problem changing her tires. I can change, but I have never had a flat, and I use Continental. I've been using 700 by 32C Continental Gator Skin tires, and man, those things are just, I mean, on gravel and on I don't know, whatever crappy roads I've been on, they've been fine and they're good in water. Knock on wood. So far they've worked, but I overbring tubes, CO2 canisters. I somehow got through to Korea, even though you're not supposed to be able to travel internationally with them, but you
That's
can
true.
pick them up in bike shops, overseas. I carry a small pump also. I just like whatever's going to go wrong. I always on my bike, I have, two CO2 cartridges. I have a bike pump. I've got a tire patch kit, tube patch, whatever you want to use it for. And I know how to use it. I check my tires almost every day at the end of a ride just to make sure there's no, I don't know, you just get like little pieces of glass. It helps to have a little pair of tweezers because sometimes you get these, when like steel belted radial tires, you get those little pieces of metal that can get lodged in your tire, and that just like is going to work its way into a tube. So if you can pull that out before that happens, you usually don't need to patch anything. It's, such a little hole. Yeah, get really comfortable with tires. And I bring a small bottle of chain lube, and I lubricate my chain every few days. And if I've been in the mud, I wash off my bike at night. And I always have a rag for my chain or my hands or whatever I'm dealing with. Certainly, I've had chain problems. I've had derailleur problems. I've had various things on the road. So, but when it's a big problem, I need to go to a bike shop for that. So, sometimes you limp into bike shops, and like my daughter and I, we spent a day in Astoria at a bike shop because we both had bike problems, and we could not have finished the trip if we hadn't found a fabulous bike mechanic angel who put us at the front of the line and took care of each of our problems. Derailleur hanger I carry now because that was what broke for me. Yeah, it's good to do your homework. Some spokes, two spokes because you can't always get them in the size you need.
And other than a phone, do you carry an iPad or a laptop or anything like that?
No, I use my phone. I've got and my Wahoo device. That's how I do, I have that to record my rides. I would recommend getting a Jawbone sound systems. I know a lot of people, especially if you're trying to listen to maps, TDA, I'd say one of the great things that they provide to their participants is these maps. And they're updating the maps during the trip as they get intel. Like when we were in Japan, one of the mountain passes we had to go over there was the small typhoon that came through, washed out the pass, and apparently it was going to take months to restore this. So they had to scramble and come up with a new map, and all of that was loaded by the morning we started. So that was pretty cool. But you have to listen to it. I just don't like putting something in my ears, and I don't think that's safe, even if you're just putting one. Henceforth, I'm going to use a Jawbone. So it'll just give sound and I don't have to put anything in my ears. I can hear the traffic sounds. I can hear if somebody talks to me.
You're writing a book, or you've written a book.
I have written a book about riding. That's my narrative anyway. It's also about all the things that we do, all the places we go in our head when we're doing a long ride. And I think that that's a rich part of the long distance bike travel experience. It changes by my trip. So when I went down the coast of California, we had just my family, we had just put my mother in a memory care center. And she already didn't remember our names. I was just really processing the loss of my mother during that trip. And like so many of us, I didn't have a perfect relationship with my mother, so I was also processing some of my bitterness and my own self, like the baggage we shouldn't carry that we do, and trying to let go of it. And I wrote about that, and I also wrote about I've done some work with ayahuasca, and I'd had a really disturbing trip recently, and so I was working through that too. It sort of took a lop out of my self-confidence, and I needed to right side myself. So I have a long-standing Zen Buddhist meditation practice, and so my meditation travels with me when I'm on a bike trip too. Anyway, it sounds like a very messy book, but I think it's fairly tight narrative, and I have an agent who's shopping it right now, but because I'm not an influencer, not a celebrity, the likelihood of it actually getting picked up is small, but the joy of writing this book was profound. I don't really care if it doesn't, nothing happens with it. It was really a great experience to write. And when I was writing, like when I was going through all the editing process afterwards, I wrote, I had to do so many different updates to the manuscript. And I got down to the point where I could be riding my bike and I could be editing down to the sentence and word level. And I could just go home. I didn't need to stop and write anything down. I would just go home and I'd be like, oh, turn to page such and such, go to this word, change this word here. It was just cool.
I agree. I write a lot and I edit while I'm riding a bike. For some reason, those phrases and words come very easily during a bike ride, and you're right. I don't forget them. I make the edits when I'm settled in again.
On the trip through Japan, that was really different. I was working through my like I went there, like part of my intention of the trip was of course to have a great ride, but it was also to take advantage of all of the opportunities I had to meditate impromptu in these random shrines I'd pass wherever the inspiration pulled me. So I was definitely that odd person on the trip who would people would ride by and see my bike, just leaning on a stone wall, and they'd sort of know I had just disappeared up into some forest. And I really was thinking a lot about my practice while I was riding. So that was my mental space on that trip.
What advice would you give someone who's thinking about bike travel?
Do it. Just try. I mean, I've heard you talk about there's a lot of ways for people who I am the type of person who dives into pools, dives into lakes. I like cold plunges, but a lot of people don't. And I think this whole idea of going, finding a group, but if you can find other people
Hmm.
to do it with, and like you pointed out earlier, and I agree, like people love to talk about the bike process. They like to meet other kindred souls, other curious people. And there's a lot of people like myself who don't have a spouse to share it with. And so it's really fun to go and meet up with others who will help you. And it's such a wonderfully supportive community.
What adventures do you have planned upcoming?
Yeah, so I have the Odyssey, this thing from Athens to
Right.
Amsterdam. And prior to that, my husband's Belgian, and he's a rock climber still. He was a professional rock climber. So when I'm off on these bike trips, he's actually climbing just as seriously, ferociously. And so we're going to the south of France for 3 weeks before that trip starts, and he's going to be climbing. And I get to ride on those beautiful roads in Provence. And I've only rented a bike over there before. I'm really excited to take my new Moots bike over there and hopefully go back up Mount Ventoux and hit some gems while I'm there, and actually get my legs, sort of fine-tuned for the trip. By the way, I listened to one of your podcasts, Ken Francis.
Oh, Ken,
You
yes.
interviewed. and talk to him about warm showers. And I want to thank you so. I mean, first of all, I learn every time I've listened to one of your podcasts, I learned something. But Ken was interesting because he was talking about warm showers and being a host. And so after listening to that, I talked to my husband, and I think we're gonna maybe try it
Good.
once we're grounded up here. The only caveat is to get to our house, you have to do an 1,800-foot climb. But no, we'd like to try it. And yeah, I find all of the people you've interviewed really motivating. I hope this one pays forward.
Well, Karen, I wish you the best on those upcoming adventures. Loved hearing your stories. I want to read your book when it's out. I think it will be very, very fun read. Thanks again, and maybe we'll cross paths one of these days.
I would love that. You're not far away.
Listening to Karen's bike travel stories makes me really want to ride in South Korea. She makes it sound like a bicycler's paradise. I'll include links in the description. I mentioned earlier that Karen has authored a book about her bicycling adventures. It's called Bike Mind, and I can't wait for it to be published. Karen sent me an excerpt from the book so I can share it with you listeners. To whet your appetite, I'm going to read a few paragraphs here. This reading is taken from Chapter 2. Karen is embarking on her first long bike trip from the border of Oregon and California to the southern border of California at Mexico. We can all relate to her feelings. Please listen and enjoy. And then I turned south, clipped into my pedals, and started to ride. Arnold took a video as I headed down the road, a video in which I never looked back. There was no backhanded wave, no blown kisses. When he told Lauren later, deflated, she just laughed. That's so mommy. The thought didn't occur to me. I was wound so tight that I probably wouldn't have noticed if he'd driven by waving or if one of the pencil trees was burning on the other side of the road. All that mattered in that moment was the need to escape my raging desire not to start. Remind me, why am I doing this? This isn't normal. Why can't I be normal? Why am I punctuating the end of my career with something that I'll likely fail at instead of sitting poolside with a stack of books and a whiskey sour, listening to yacht rock? A truck flew by on my left shoulder, right wheel flattening an already flattened squirrel. What if I crash? What if I'm not strong enough? What if I hate this? It's not too late to change your mind. This cocktail of doubt, fear, and uncertainty slushed around my head as I rode away, bogging me in the slurry. You can't fail something you haven't started, right? So the first goal was simply to pedal until Arnold disappeared down the road, long enough so I could no longer turn around and say, just kidding.